Welcome to American Modern News for September 2018. I'm your host, Mark Jimenez. Today we're having a special report on steel, or rather, the Trump administration policy on steel. Some have questioned the use of Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, which allows the president to use tariffs for national security purposes. We believe the policy is there for a reason, and believe that a case could be made for ensuring our steel industry is strong and protected from others dumping steel in our country. But our growing concern with the use of this tariff mechanism reached the tipping point last month when the President of the United States went beyond not only having these tariffs on our NATO allies, but stated that he was going to double them from 25% for steel and 10% for aluminum to 50% and 20% for Turkey. Now, more on Turkey in a minute. But we just want to state, when using national security as the reason for invoking Section 232, we should at least ensure that we use it in a way that does not hurt national security. We want to point out that one of the pillars of our security has been the NATO military alliance. As the only nation to ever invoke Article 5, we have not only benefited from a commitment to a common defense, but we have actually had Europeans, Canadian, and Turkish soldiers die in our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan as they rallied to support us. And of all the NATO members, we believe that geographically, there is no more valuable member than Turkey. Turkey is the bridge between Europe and the Middle East, as well as North Africa. Losing that friendship and the access and support it provides for American power projection in that volatile part of the world deals a critical structural blow to our military and intelligence capabilities. Not only that, by being a Muslim majority country and a member of NATO has always allowed us to make the case that we can work with other nations in the Middle East as partners and friends. All of that is now in jeopardy. We will swing back to Turkey in a moment, but first, it may be helpful to start from the beginning and ask, what is the problem with steel in the first place? Now, every major country wants to protect or develop its steel industry, but for the most part, we believe that having protected our steel industry in the past delayed some important reforms. In the last 25 years of the previous century, the steel industry had drastically reduced employment all around the world. And here in the USA, it was down from 521,000 to 153,000. Now, this was not due to illegals taking our job or cheaper labor elsewhere taking our jobs. It was technological innovation. Now, this happened all across the globe as modern steel plants employ very few workers per ton. In fact, we believe in America, we were slow to allow consolidation and reform in the sector because of concerns with jobs. But that did not help us keep jobs in the long term. It just made us less competitive. Steel in Asia or in Europe is actually cheaper than steel in America. However, we are holding our own. The elephant in the room, in our view, is China. Take a look at this chart. While production in the United States has remained flat since 1990, it has exploded in China. China now produces over 10 times the steel we produce in the United States. Not 10% more, 10 times what we produce in the United States. Although China's rapid economic expansion consumes the vast majority of this steel, even a miscalculation or overproduction of 3 to 5% is enough to flood the global steel markets. This is the real problem and the main problem with steel around the world. Which is why we're concerned and we're initially suspicious of our steel policy when in August of 2017, China, negotiating with the United States, offered to cut steel production by 150 million tons. Now that's quite a bit since in 2017 it produced 817 million tons. It's more than 18% of their production. They would start doing that immediately and continue to do that until 2022. And despite administration officials recommending the president accept the offer, President Trump rejected the offer. Why? It would not mean that there would be no additional negotiations or issues, but it would have weakened his ability to use Section 232 to punish countries indiscriminately. Here's the problem. Take a look at what happens here. There's an oversupply of steel in the world, and that is mostly really coming from China. If China's production went down by 150 million tons, the outcome would be beneficial as the supply and demand of steel balances around the world. Now here's the outcome of accepting the Chinese offer to cut steel. Steel prices in Asia, America, and Europe would all rise together. This would be beneficial for our steel unions, for our steel workers, as they would make bigger profits on their steel. And we would do so without hurting our manufacturing sector. Now, the outcome of raising tariffs on steel for steel imports in the United States would be that Asia and Europe remain the same, but the prices of steel and aluminum go up in the United States. And while that may help the steel sector, at least in the short term, it would significantly damage the manufacturing sector, and many companies have stated this already. From cars to toasters to refrigerators, the prices of your main inputs are going up, while they're not going up in the rest of the world. This could push manufacturing jobs out of the United States. The steel industry is about 1.5% of our economy. The manufacturing sector is about 10% of our economy. Since these policies took place, steel prices in the United States have risen 17% and oil prices have risen 22%. And the president has already started undermining the Fed's independence by being openly critical of the rate increases. But it's his own policies that are pushing interest rate higher. Inflation is here, partly because of his policies, and it's going to keep growing unless the Fed continues its policy of gradual rate increases, which has been going on for years. Now, let's talk about Turkey again, which is what really got us to start researching this topic. The President of the United States said last month on a Friday, there's an American Christian being held captive in Turkey, so we're going to punish the Turks until they release him. We thought that was unusual. Obviously, at American Moderate News, we want to make sure that all Americans that are being held overseas are allowed to come home safely, even if they were guilty of something or not. But what really struck us odd was how aggressive the president was against Turkey. Now, there are currently 20 Americans held by foreign countries around the world. And the American pastor, Andrew Brunson, has been a prisoner for 1.5 years, essentially the entire time, the duration of the Trump presidency. And Mr. Brunson is not sitting in a cold, dark cell. He's on house arrest. So why now? The reason is, in our view, is that the holding of that pastor who's been there for 1.5 years is an excuse. The real reason is that Turkey announced the day before the sanctions, the president announced his sanctions, that as a free and sovereign nation, they had a right to purchase their energy resources from anyone they wanted. And some of that energy would come from Iran, which is a neighbor of Turkey. That's the reason why he slapped that doubling of tariffs on them. Now, President Trump has announced that by November, anyone trading with Iran will not be trading with the United States. And we just want to point out that these are the countries that have stated they will continue to trade with anyone they choose, including Iran. China, India, Europe, Brazil, and many more countries. Not to mention, of course, that we have these tariffs on Canada and Mexico. American moderate news believes this position is untenable for the United States. We ask, whose interest are we serving with this policy? Who do we work for? In November, which is in a month and a half, less than that, we will either have humiliated the United States by exposing the obvious fact that we can't impose sanctions on more than half the globe without causing a global economic crisis, or, actually worse, stop trading with Europe, China, Russia, India, Turkey, and many other nations, and plunge the world in an economic depression led by the United States. Now, it is possible that the Trump administration will be able to bully enough countries to significantly damage their trading with Iran. But there's a very high price to pay for this limited strategy. Limitedly in terms of success. There are economic security of the United States and military security of the United States. Now, America has been the leader of the free world since World War I, essentially. This is a combination of economic power, military might, and moral leadership. Now, other countries have embraced this reality, in part because they have no choice, yes, but it makes it more palatable because as Winston Churchill once said, America always does the right thing after they've tried everything else. You gotta love the Brits. Now, in this half jest, we can find some truth. The smaller nations have always accepted American leadership, in part because they assumed America would not violate principles and shared values, such as free trade and human rights. But this bully approach is changing all of those assumptions, and the consequences are as real as they are negative as they are long-term. In September this month, Mr. Juncker stated that the euro must become a reserve currency that rivals the US dollar. When one considers the advantages we have enjoyed by holding the reserve currency status in terms of interest on our debt, ability to simplify trade in our favor, etc., this is a real concern. And I quote this from the Financial Times. The move reflects Europe's concern at how the United States President Donald Trump has moved to weaponize the dollar as an instrument of foreign policy to punish American rivals. The White House has threatened European companies with expulsion from the U.S. financial system for defying tough new sanctions against Iran. Some European Union diplomats say the rift over the 2015 Iranian nuclear deal, which the U.S. has abandoned but which the Europeans want to preserve, is a salutary lesson about the dominance of the dollar. Now this is devastating, and it's a seismic shift. But it's not the only one. Again, Turkey has gone from being a staunch ally of the United States, a staunch ally and member of NATO, to calling the United States its enemy, with large anti-American protests. Turkey is now purchasing Russian, non-NATO compatible missiles. We're in danger of losing a critical NATO ally. And that's not it. Japan and the European Union had never quite had the motivation to culminate their free trade agreement until now. They have signed an agreement which will create essentially a free trade area with 600 million people, making it the largest trading bloc in the world. Prior to this, NAFTA was the largest trading bloc, but now that's in jeopardy. And after that, the largest trading bloc is the European Union. This is going to expand that even more. And America is not participating. And also, we have Russia and China conducting joint military exercises. In the past, Russia would conduct military exercises to prepare to fight China. This is a political setback for the United States. China actually gave Vladimir Putin the Friendship Medal, the only one they've issued. And relationships between China and Russia are warming. And we are pushing them into each other's arms. In fact, Europe is so outraged by the President of the United States and his policies that it's not possible for the President to visit a European country without having tens of thousands of people demonstrate. When the President visited England, the streets were filled with tens of thousands of demonstrators protesting him and his policies. When the President was planning to go to Ireland, that trip was cancelled, and the first one to announce the cancellation was not the United States, it was Ireland. In fact, the United States was still bickering that maybe it would still happen. This isn't good for the United States, and this is not false news. This is not some kind of radical left wing. This is a reflection of the image of the United States around the world. In a short period of time, America has gone from being the leader of the free world to being a pariah. That's not good. That's not good for us. And while Mexico has agreed tentatively to sign up to this new reform deal, which is slightly less advantageous for them, but frankly actually also limits our competitiveness by raising certain costs and fees. But Mexico has to accept the deal. But they're not going to forget the way that they were so blatantly bullied and insulted. That's going to last a long time. And Canada is still holding out. Canada says they're not signing this agreement unless it's more beneficial to Canada. So we're in danger of losing the Canadians. The Canadians are hurt and kind of outraged by the way they're being treated by the United States. To deny the world is working around the U.S. instead of relying on American leadership and taking steps that will hurt our competitiveness is like saying that global warming is a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese. It's a lie. It's wrong. And it has consequences. American Moderate News believes NAFTA has been an enormous success for all three nations, despite what the current administration says. The numbers are there. From productivity gains from 1.5% we were stuck in to 2.5% economic expansion. Even though some jobs were lost, we gained many more jobs and better paying jobs and economic vitality. And frankly, it's a little disturbing to see how many of Trump's supporters, formerly very supportive of our military and a strong NATO alliance, have put all that behind them and now reflect the President of the United States' disdain and disrespect for our allies. American Moderate News believes there's no rational or beneficial explanation for the Trump administration's treatment of the European Union in general and Turkey in particular, as well as NAFTA in general and Canada in particular. We're treating our friends like dirt, and they have taken note. And we are showering praise upon our enemies, such as Russia and North Korea, which has emboldened them. So where does this leave us with this administration's policy on steel and its protectionist tendencies, and its tendencies to attack those that used to be close and trusted allies of the United States? Well, The Economist magazine has suggested that Trump should learn from Putin, that friends are an asset, not a liability. At American Moderate News, we believe diplomacy should reflect the reality that we are the most powerful military on earth, at least as long as other nations continue to buy our debt, which is how we are financing it. But not more powerful than all the other nations on earth. America should smartly negotiate to lure the world to want to do business with us, not force them to do business with us. And to rely on our good name and our good reputation as a reliable partner to lead the world towards peace, stability, and prosperity. We believe that Trump's administration's policies on steel and protectionism is as wrong as Dilma Rousseff's was on Petrobras. Intending to force the development of heavy shipbuilding industry in Brazil and distributing the wealth of PBR via mandated quotas on oil prices, she instead brought one of the best deep water exploration and production companies in the world to the edge of bankruptcy It did not work for Brazil, and it will not work for the United States. Sadly, we have been supportive of the President of the United States authority to use Section 232, but vehemently disagree with how he's wielding that power and the blows he is landing with his outbursts and tariffs and insults are hurting Iran. But his actions are isolating the United States and hurting America a lot more, damaging our strategic and military alliances. Those blows he is so publicly dealing on our allies are shattering the structural integrity of the pillars of American security. From the NATO military alliance to NAFTA economically, to the rule of law in our own country, striking out at the Department of Justice and the FBI, and the core of our democracy by attacking the free press and calling them the enemy of the people. His policy on steel is merely an excuse to go after Iran by threatening our friends. Otherwise, why not accept the Chinese offer to cut steel production? Why double tariffs on Turkey the day after they stated they would continue to buy some of their energy from Iran? Why are we attacking Canadian steel, which even the Steelworkers Union representative told us was the wrong thing to do? Section 232 was meant to be used for national security, the security of the United States. If this is benefiting a nation, we don't know. But it is certainly not benefiting the United States.